The armored fighting around Asal-Uttar is often remembered through the names of tanks, Pakistani Pattons, Indian Centurions, older Shermans, and light AMX-13s. Those names matter because machines shape what soldiers can attempt and what commanders believe is possible. But the battle cannot be understood as a simple contest of which tank looked better on paper. The Chem-Karan sector turned vehicles into parts of a larger battlefield system, where ground, concealment, mines, artillery, infantry, fuel, recovery, and command judgment mattered as much as armor plate or gunpowder. This episode sits at the point where hardware has to be explained carefully, because the famous wreckage of Asal-Uttar came from machines meeting conditions they were not free to choose. If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore. For Pakistan, the Patton tank carried enormous symbolic weight. American-supplied M47 and M48 Pattons represented modern armored power in a region where many formations still operated a mixed collection of older equipment. They looked strong, they sounded modern, and they gave Pakistan's armored forces confidence that a fast, heavy thrust could break through the Indian front. In broad terms, the Patton offered good firepower, useful mobility, and the radio-equipped command style expected of post-war armored formations. It was not a wonder weapon, and no serious tank ever is. It was a capable machine whose battlefield value depended on the training of its crew, the skill of its commanders, and the ability of the whole formation to keep moving as a combined arms team. The Patton's strengths were real enough to make Indian soldiers take it seriously. It could hit hard at useful combat ranges, and its profile on the battlefield could be intimidating, especially when advancing in numbers. The tank was built for a world in which armored units were expected to maneuver, exploit gaps, and fight other tanks with speed and firepower. It also benefited from the post-war assumption that radios and better suspension gave commanders more freedom than earlier generations had enjoyed. But strength can become dangerous when it encourages overconfidence. A tank that is powerful in open maneuver may become vulnerable when visibility is poor, ground is soft, routes are mined, and supporting infantry cannot keep pace. At Asal-Uttar, the Patton's reputation entered a battlefield that would test every assumption behind it. India's armored situation looked less clean and less modern. Indian units in the sector used a mixture that included British-designed Centurions, older American-built Shermans left from the Second World War era, and French AMX-13 light tanks. This mixture reflected the reality of many post-colonial armies in the mid-20th century. Procurement came in layers, and units often had to fight with what was available, rather than with an ideal standardized fleet. That variety created problems in maintenance, training, ammunition supply, and battlefield roles. Different tanks had different speeds, protections, and tactical uses. Yet a mixed force could still be dangerous if commanders understood what each type could do and placed the right vehicle in the right part of the fight. The Centurion was the most respected Indian tank in this battle's memory, and with reason. It was not new by 1965, but it was a solid, well-balanced machine whose gun, armor, and stability made it a serious opponent for the Patton when handled well. The Centurion's value at Asal-Uttar was not that it magically outclassed everything in front of it. Its value came from the way it could be used from prepared positions, hull down where possible, firing from concealment or from ground that limited the enemy's freedom. A defending tank does not have to race an attacker across the whole countryside. It can wait, aim, shift, and use the attacker's movement against him. In that kind of fight, the Centurion became a dangerous instrument. The Sherman was a different story. By 1965, the Sherman was an old tank, a veteran design from the Second World War that had fought in many armies and many theaters. Against more modern tanks, it could be at a disadvantage, especially in protection and firepower, depending on the exact version and battlefield conditions. Yet it would be a mistake to write it off as useless. Older tanks could still support infantry, hold defensive positions, cover approaches, and add firepower where the enemy was slowed or exposed. In a battle shaped by mines, water, crops, and village fighting, even an older vehicle could matter if it was placed intelligently. The Sherman's lesson is that usefulness in war is contextual, not determined by age alone. The AMX-13 added another kind of capability, It was a light French tank, smaller and more mobile than the heavy-looking Pattons and the sturdier Centurions. Light tanks were not meant to win a head-on slugging match against heavier armor in open country. Their value lay in mobility, scouting, fire support, and being able to move where heavier machines might struggle. But lightness is always a bargain. It can make a vehicle nimble, but it usually means less protection. And less protection becomes frightening when the enemy brings heavy guns and artillery to bear. In the Asal Uttar story, the AMX-13 reminds us that armored forces are not made of one kind of vehicle. They are toolkits, and the wrong tool in the wrong role can be lost quickly. The battlefield around Kem Karan changed what all these tanks meant. In a clean desert or on broad, dry plains, tank comparisons might lean more heavily on speed, range, and gunnery. Around Asal Uttar, fields of sugarcane, soft ground, irrigation channels, villages, embankments, and deliberately flooded areas made the fight much more complicated. A tank crew's world could shrink to a narrow lane, a half-seen movement in the crops, or a suspected anti-tank position near a village edge. Heavy vehicles might be forced toward predictable routes. A commander who expected sweeping movement could find his force broken into smaller groups, each dealing with mines, mud, fire, and uncertainty. Under those conditions, the best tank was often the one used with the best tactical sense. Crew training and fire discipline mattered as much as design. A well-trained crew could identify a target faster, fire more accurately, use cover better, and recover from surprise more effectively. Radio communication helped tank units coordinate, but only when commanders used it clearly and when the tactical situation had not become too confused. Maintenance crews mattered too, because a tank battle consumes vehicles not only through enemy fire, but through breakdowns, damaged tracks, engines under strain, and the endless pressure of moving heavy machines in difficult country. Recovery vehicles and mechanics rarely receive the attention given to famous tank models, but without them, armored strength drains away. A division can begin with impressive equipment and still lose fighting power if it cannot keep that equipment running. Combined arms was the decisive issue behind the hardware. Pattons advancing without close infantry, reliable reconnaissance, engineer support, and artillery coordination were far more vulnerable than Pattons moving as part of a balanced system. Indian tanks firing from prepared positions were more effective when infantry held nearby ground, engineers shaped the approaches, and artillery disrupted concentrations. The defender's job was to deny the attacker a smooth armored rhythm. The attacker's job was to preserve that rhythm despite obstacles and resistance. At Asal Uttar, the Indian defense increasingly forced Pakistani armor into a fight where its strengths were harder to use. That is why the battle cannot be reduced to Patton versus Centurion. It was a contest between a thrust trying to preserve motion and a defense trying to break it apart. This hardware story also fits the longer evolution of tank warfare. At Cambrai, tanks were novel machines used to break trench systems, but their success could not be exploited fully because the broader system was not mature. By 1965, tanks were faster, better armed, and better connected by radio, yet the same basic truth remained. Armor could shock, penetrate, and threaten deep objectives, but it needed infantry, artillery, engineers, logistics, and command tempo to turn tactical movement into operational success. Asal Uttar showed that post-war tanks had become more capable without becoming independent of the battlefield around them. The more powerful the armored force, the greater the temptation to believe it can decide events alone. The battlefield repeatedly punishes that temptation. The later phrase, Patton graveyard, has shaped popular memory, but memory can simplify a battle until machines become symbols instead of tools. Pakistani tanks were destroyed or captured in significant numbers, and the visual evidence of wrecked Pattons became unforgettable. Still, wreckage is not the same thing as a complete explanation. Some vehicles were knocked out by tank fire, some by anti-tank weapons, some became trapped or abandoned, and different accounts do not always agree on exact totals. What matters for understanding is the pattern rather than a single number. A modern armored thrust entered country that had been made hostile to it, lost freedom of movement, and met a defense that exploited its difficulties. The machines became famous because the system around them failed. The lesson of Pattons, Centurions, Shermans, and AMX-13s is not that equipment is unimportant, Equipment matters deeply because it gives commanders options and gives crews chances to live or die. But equipment never fights in isolation. A good tank poorly supported can become a target, while an older or less glamorous tank used from good ground can become deadly. At Asal Utar, the battlefield judged not only design, but doctrine, training, patience, reconnaissance, and adaptation. The tanks entered the story as machines of steel and fuel, but they left it as evidence of a larger truth in armored warfare. The side that uses ground, timing, and combined arms better can make even superior-looking armor fight the wrong battle.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.